When we think about food, most of us reduce it to calories, vitamins, or energy. We measure it by how full it makes us, how much strength it gives, or even how much pleasure it brings to our taste buds. But very rarely do we pause and ask ourselves a deeper question: what does this food do to my soul? You see, we live in a world where food is not just nutrition, it is spiritual. Every bite you take either feeds the light within you, or makes room for shadows to enter. What you eat matters more than you think, because it is not only shaping your body, it is shaping your spirit, your mind, and even your ability to hear God's voice clearly. Now, many people laugh when you tell them that food has spiritual weight. They think it is just a matter of diet, science, or health trends. But look carefully. Why do you think ancient cultures, from the Israelites to early Christians, placed so much emphasis on what they ate? Why do you think fasting is such a central discipline in spiritual traditions across the world? Because what you put into your body has a direct effect on the sensitivity of your spirit. A clean diet sharpens your awareness. A reckless diet dulls it. Food is not neutral. It either pushes you toward light or nudges you toward darkness. Let me explain it in psychological terms. The brain, which houses your thoughts, emotions, and decisions, is directly influenced by the nutrients you consume. When you overload your body with refined sugars, chemicals, or heavy toxins, your brain begins to misfire. Anxiety rises, focus drops, and decision-making becomes cloudy. When the mind is clouded, the spirit is weakened because discernment relies on clarity. Darkness thrives in confusion, in fog, in the absence of sharp awareness. That is why when people binge on harmful foods, they often feel sluggish, irritable, or even spiritually dry. It is not just a coincidence, it is a direct consequence. Philosophically speaking, the human being is not divided into compartments where the body does one thing, the mind another, and the spirit another. We are integrated beings. The body, mind, and spirit flow into each other like rivers converging into one stream. You cannot poison the body and expect the spirit to remain unaffected. You cannot neglect the body and imagine the mind will stay sharp. If one part suffers, the whole suffers. This is why Scripture calls the body the temple of the Holy Spirit. A temple is sacred. It is designed for worship, for holiness, for communion with the divine. But what happens if the temple is filled with pollution? The presence of God feels distant, not because God left, but because the vessel is no longer aligned to receive Him. Let me ask you, have you ever noticed that when you eat lightly and cleanly, your thoughts feel lighter? Prayer becomes easier, focus becomes sharper, and even your emotions feel steadier. But when you overindulge in greasy, processed, or heavy foods, everything feels weighed down, your body resists, your mind feels foggy, and your spirit feels less eager to pray or worship. This is not just biology. This is spirituality manifesting through biology. It is the visible proof that food carries spiritual consequences. Think of it like tuning an instrument. Your soul is like a violin. If you keep it clean, polished, and tuned, it produces a beautiful sound, harmonizing with the Spirit of God. But if you neglect it, if you let dirt, rust, or slackness creep in, the strings lose their tension and the sound becomes distorted. The same is true of what you consume. Food either sharpens the tuning of your soul or makes it discordant. There is also a psychological dimension here that goes deeper. Certain foods are addictive by design. They hijack your brain's reward system, training you to crave more, even when your body does not need it. Why is this dangerous spiritually? Because addiction, no matter how small, is a chain, and every chain that binds you weakens your freedom to walk in the light. A person who cannot say no to a sugary drink or a processed snack is training their soul to submit to the desires of the flesh rather than the discipline of the spirit. The Bible calls us to self-control, but how can you develop self-control in larger areas of life if you cannot master what goes into your own mouth? Food becomes a training ground for spiritual strength, or a battlefield where many quietly lose. And let us not forget the symbolic nature of food. The very first temptation in the Garden of Eden involved eating. It was not a weapon, not a lie spoken alone, but food that was used to break fellowship with God. Even Jesus at the beginning of his ministry fasted for 40 days, and the first temptation Satan brought was again about food. Turn these stones into bread. Why food? Because food represents desire, appetite, survival. It touches the most basic layer of human existence. If the enemy can influence you at that level, he already has access to your deeper layers. What you eat and how you approach eating is not a small matter. It is a doorway to greater battles of the soul. So when I say that what you eat matters, I am not just talking about health. I am talking about your destiny. I am talking about your ability to think clearly, to pray effectively, to resist temptation, and to walk in freedom. Do not underestimate the power of what you allow on your plate, because in many ways it decides what kind of power flows through your spirit. Now, does this mean you must become rigid, fearful, or obsessed with every bite? That is not the spirit of freedom, but of bondage. Instead, it means you cultivate awareness. You ask yourself before you eat, will this fuel my spirit, or will this weaken it? Will this bring me closer to light, or open the door for shadows? You choose intentionally, not just based on taste or convenience, but based on alignment with the life you want to live. Imagine if you began to see food as sacred, every meal an offering, every choice a step toward clarity or confusion. Imagine the power of deciding daily to honor God with what you consume. Over time, those small decisions accumulate, and suddenly you find your mind clearer, your emotions more stable, and your prayers deeper. You become more sensitive to the whisper of the Spirit, because your vessel is no longer clouded by what was never meant to be inside of you. You see, discipline in eating is not about legalism. It is about freedom. It is about removing the footholds that darkness uses to enter unnoticed. It is about reclaiming the temple of your body as a sacred dwelling for divine presence. And once you realize that, food is no longer just food. It becomes a spiritual practice, a declaration that you choose life, clarity, and light over confusion, addiction, and shadows. When we talk about the foods that invite darkness, I am not simply pointing to a list of forbidden ingredients or some rigid dietary law. What I am speaking about are certain categories of consumption that consistently weaken the body, cloud the mind, and most importantly, dull the spirit. They are not just unhealthy for your physical frame, they make your soul more vulnerable to influences that thrive in weakness, confusion, and imbalance. These foods are not merely dietary choices, they become spiritual openings. The first of these is refined sugar. Now, sugar in its natural form as it appears in fruits is not the problem. The problem lies in the way we have taken what was once natural and concentrated it into a substance so addictive that it manipulates the human brain in ways similar to a drug. Have you noticed how people crave it even when they know it is harming them? How it soothes temporarily but then leaves the body crashing, begging for more? That is not just hunger, that is bondage. When you flood your system with refined sugar, your brain's dopamine pathways light up like fireworks, training you to associate sweetness with reward. But that reward is shallow and fleeting. Soon the crash comes, and with it fatigue, irritability, and anxiety. Spiritually, this is dangerous because it teaches you to depend on external stimulants for comfort instead of training your soul to find peace in God. Darkness loves dependency. It thrives where there is addiction. Every spoonful of refined sugar, when abused, is not just harming your body, it is subtly training your spirit to seek satisfaction in temporary highs rather than eternal truths. The second category is processed foods. These are the meals that come in boxes, bags, and packages, filled with preservatives, chemicals, and artificial flavors, designed to trick the body into thinking it is nourished, when in reality, it is starved of true life-giving nutrients. Have you ever eaten a fast food meal and then felt hungry again an hour later, even though you consumed hundreds of calories? That is not real nourishment, that is manipulation. Processed foods are engineered for convenience and profit, not for life. They clog the body, weigh down digestion, and create a sense of sluggishness. But the spiritual danger lies deeper. Processed foods desensitize you. They condition you to accept what is fake as if it were real. Artificial sweetness replaces natural sweetness, chemical flavoring replaces natural flavor, and in time, your very taste buds forget what authentic nourishment feels like. If your tongue becomes blind to what is real, how much more easily can your soul become blind to what is true? It is no coincidence that a society drowning in processed foods is also drowning in confusion, unable to distinguish what is real from what is counterfeit. When you train your body to accept artificial substitutes, you risk training your spirit to do the same. And then there is alcohol, the third food, or rather drink, that consistently invites darkness when consumed excessively. Let us be clear, the Bible does not universally forbid wine, but it consistently warns of the dangers of drunkenness. Why? Because alcohol, more than almost any other substance, weakens the mind's defenses. It lowers inhibition, blurs judgment, and opens the door for choices you would never make sober. Think of how many lives have been destroyed by decisions made under the influence of alcohol. Broken families, violence, wasted potential, and spiritual collapse. Alcohol numbs, and in that numbness, the spirit becomes vulnerable. The enemy does not need to work hard when you willingly shut down your clarity. What is most dangerous is that alcohol often masquerades as comfort. People drink to relax, to forget, to escape. But every escape that bypasses God is a trap. Darkness thrives where people seek relief without transformation. Now, notice the common thread between these three: refined sugar, processed foods, and excessive alcohol. Each of them creates a false promise. Sugar promises happiness, but it delivers anxiety. Processed food promises convenience, but it delivers emptiness. Alcohol promises freedom, but it delivers bondage. Do you see it? The shadow always works through deception. It offers light in the moment, but in the long run, it pulls you deeper into the dark. These foods are dangerous not simply because of what they are, but because of what they teach you to expect from life. They condition you to trade real nourishment for temporary satisfaction, to substitute the eternal for the immediate. From a psychological perspective, this is profoundly destructive. The more you indulge in these substances, the more you train your brain to crave quick fixes. Patience diminishes, resilience weakens, and the ability to endure discomfort fades. Spiritual growth requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to endure short-term discomfort for long-term transformation. But how can you develop those qualities when your daily diet is teaching your nervous system to demand instant gratification? If you cannot resist a cookie, how will you resist temptation when it comes cloaked in something far more serious? If you cannot say no to one more drink, how will you say no when life presents you with destructive opportunities that seem attractive? The foods we eat are not small matters. They are training ground for the soul. Philosophically, let us go even deeper. These foods reveal something about the nature of evil itself. Evil rarely presents itself as ugly, bitter, or repulsive. It comes sweetened, processed, and intoxicating. It dresses itself as something desirable, convenient, or relaxing. That is why refined sugar feels so comforting, processed food feels so easy, and alcohol feels so liberating. The form disguises the consequence. By consuming them without awareness, you are rehearsing, meal after meal, the very pattern of falling into temptation, seeing what looks pleasant, ignoring the warning signs, indulging, and then paying the price afterward. Do you see how food becomes more than just food? It becomes a living parable of how darkness seduces humanity. Now, I am not telling you that a single cookie will condemn your soul, or that eating processed food once will invite demonic oppression. That is not the message. The message is awareness, discipline, and spiritual clarity. The danger is not the occasional slip, the danger is the pattern. When these foods become habits, when they dominate your diet, they begin to dominate your spirit. And the more they dominate, the less room there is for light to flourish. The call here is not fear but freedom. You have the power to choose. You have the power to break the cycle of addiction, the fog of chemicals, and the numbness of intoxication. You can reclaim your plate as a place of empowerment, not enslavement. When you choose whole, nourishing, natural foods, you are not just feeding your body, you are feeding your clarity, your self-control, your spiritual strength. You are training yourself to resist deception and embrace truth, not just at the table but in every area of life. We have seen how food can either sharpen or weaken the spirit, how some choices invite clarity while others open the door to darkness. But the question remains, if these harmful foods drain life from the soul, then what foods bring light, energy, and alignment with God's presence? Because the point is not only about what to avoid, it is about what to embrace. Life in the spirit is not simply about resisting darkness but about intentionally choosing light. When you eat, you are not just feeding your body, you are setting the atmosphere for your spirit. And the foods that bring light are not mysterious or complicated. They are the simple, natural gifts of creation, whole foods, living foods, unaltered by human manipulation, fruits that carry sweetness as nature designed, vegetables filled with fiber and minerals, grains that provide steady strength, pure water that cleanses and renews. All of these feed the body while keeping the spirit alert. They do not enslave you in addiction. They liberate you in clarity. They do not cloud the mind. They brighten it. They do not weigh you down. They lift you up. Think of it this way. Every natural food is a reminder of God's order. Nothing artificial, nothing disguised, nothing deceptive. An apple tastes like an apple. A tomato tastes like a tomato. Water refreshes as it is meant to refresh. There is no trickery in God's design. Contrast that with processed food. Processed food is designed to trick you, to give the illusion of flavor without real nutrition. But natural food does not deceive. It is what it is. And when you eat what is real, your spirit aligns with what is real. You learn in the deepest part of your being to embrace truth instead of lies. Psychologically, this matters because the act of choosing healthy, natural foods is itself a practice of discipline and self-awareness. When you resist the temptation of instant gratification and instead choose what is nourishing, you train your brain for resilience. You strengthen your capacity for patience. You teach your nervous system that satisfaction does not have to come instantly. It can come through endurance and wise choices. This is the very foundation of spiritual growth, the ability to delay gratification, to resist temptation, to choose what is good even when it is not easy. By choosing foods that bring light, you are not just feeding your stomach, you are rehearsing the very habits that build strength in the soul. Philosophically, let us consider this. Food is one of the most intimate connections between human beings and the earth. When you eat, you are literally taking part of creation into yourself. That is why the ancients always gave thanks before meals, because they understood that eating was not just consumption but communion. Communion with creation and communion with the Creator. Now ask yourself, when you eat foods that are heavily processed, drenched in chemicals and stripped of life, are you truly communing with creation? Or are you consuming the distortion of creation? But when you eat fresh, natural foods, you are aligning yourself with the very rhythms of nature that God declared good. That act becomes a spiritual practice, a daily liturgy of honoring the Creator through His creation. Let us also reflect on fasting because it connects directly to this. When you fast, you are choosing not to eat at all, and in doing so, you train your soul to rise above the demands of the body. But when you choose foods that bring light, you are doing something similar. You are reminding your body that it exists to serve the spirit, not the other way around. You are putting order where disorder often reigns. You are saying, I will not be mastered by my appetites, I will master them. And every time you do that, you close the door to darkness and open the door wider for light. Now I know that for many, the idea of eating cleanly and naturally sounds difficult. After all, we live in a culture where convenience dominates, where processed foods are everywhere, where sugar and alcohol are marketed as pleasures you deserve. But let me challenge you with this thought. What if your table became your altar? What if every meal was not just about filling your stomach, but about honoring your Creator? Would you not think differently about what you put on that plate? Would you not see food as a gift to be stewarded rather than a tool to be abused? And here is something important to understand. Choosing foods that bring light is not about perfection. It is not about never touching a dessert or never eating something processed again. That is not freedom. That is legalism. What I am speaking about is awareness, discipline, and intention. If the majority of your choices honor your body and align with light, you will notice the difference. You will feel it in your energy, in your emotions, in your prayer life, in your clarity of thought. The shift will not only be physical, it will be spiritual. Consider the testimony of so many who, after changing their diet, reported that their prayer life became sharper, their dreams became clearer, their emotions became steadier. This is not coincidence. The human being is a holistic creation. When the body is nourished well, the spirit finds fewer obstacles to expressing itself. When the vessel is clean, the light flows more easily. I want you to also think about legacy. The way you eat does not only affect you, it affects your children, your family, your community. When you choose foods that bring light, you set an example of discipline and wisdom. You break generational patterns of poor health and spiritual dullness. You establish a culture of clarity, energy, and alignment. And make no mistake, the enemy wants the opposite. He wants families bound by addiction to sugar, by cycles of processed junk, by habits of overindulgence. But you have the power to change that narrative, starting with your own plate. The truth is simple yet profound. Choosing foods that bring light is not just a physical act, but a spiritual declaration. It says, I will not be deceived by what is artificial. I will not be enslaved by what weakens me. I will honor my body as a temple, and I will fill it with what allows me to live in alignment with truth. That is not just nutrition, that is worship.